Hello. There was quite an amusing story in the news a couple of weeks ago. This very young TikTok star and influencer was on holiday in Wales and posted to all her fans, "Oh my God, you guys, I found this secret village in Wales, this hidden village, and I found it, and nobody knows it's here, and it's amazing, and it looks like something from coastal Italy. It's incredible, this secret hidden village, and I found it." And all her fans were like, "Oh my God, you found this secret village, oh my God." And everybody over 30 went, "That's Portmeirion. That's not secret. That's not hidden. That's one of the most popular tourist destinations in the country. It gets literally thousands of visitors every year. There was an annual rock festival there for like an entire decade. It's the village from The Prisoner. It's not just not secret. It's actually famous." So, on the one hand, it might be fun to do a video about the slightly maddening tendency of younger millennials and Gen Zs to assume that if they've never heard of something, it doesn't exist. But then I thought, no, let's talk about The Prisoner, because I don't think I've ever done a video about The Prisoner, and it was a show which was incredibly important to me when I was growing up. So here are 6 reasons why The Prisoner might just be the most important TV show ever made. Now, before we go on, bit of background. 1966, Patrick McGoohan, TV leading man, has just done 4 seasons of a secret agent show called Danger Man, which in the States was actually just called Secret Agent. Doesn't want to do any more. The network don't want to lose him. They ask him if he has any ideas for something to follow it up with. And he talks it over with the script editor, George Markstein. McGoohan, before he became a TV star, won all kinds of awards in the theatre for appearing in Ibsen plays. And I think he wants to do something a bit deeper and maybe a bit countercultural. Maybe something which addresses, the relationship between the state and the individual. Markstein, meanwhile, has been reading up about a place called Inverlair Lodge, which was an estate in Scotland, which during the war had been run as a kind of luxury prison camp for spies who were between missions, but who knew way too much to be allowed to just wander about in the outside world. And they came up with the idea of what happens if Danger Man quits? What happens if Danger Man decides he doesn't want to do it anymore, much as McGoohan just has? What happens to him? And so they had this idea about a secret agent, still played by Patrick McGoohan, possibly still John Drake, but he's never named as such. McGoohan always insists that that's because he didn't think it was the same character. Markstein always insisted that the only reason they didn't go ahead and call him John Drake was that would have involved paying money to Ralph Smart, the guy who invented Danger Man. And so we see McGoohan still apparently playing a secret agent, storming into his office in Whitehall, shouting at the man behind the desk, who is played by George Markstein in a little cameo, throwing a letter of resignation at him, then going home and being gassed by a bunch of rogue undertakers. And when he wakes up, he is now living in Portmeirion. Although it's not named as Portmeirion, it is just the village. And it is this mysterious establishment where he is free to do whatever he likes, except leave. And he doesn't know whether he's been pinched by his own side to stop him talking, or whether he's been pinched by the other side to make him talk. And that's the premise. And it's set up very neatly in 2 minutes in the opening title sequence. That's good economy of storytelling. These days, that'd be the whole pilot episode. But no, 2 minutes title sequence. You're in, you're out. Let's get on with the show. As indeed we shall get on with the show with reason number 1. Number 1, it introduced weirdness to prime time. Now, while The Prisoner is, these days, considered to be pretty much the epitome of your cult TV show, it was not meant to be a cult TV show. It was meant to be a big primetime TV show. That's how it was conceived, that's how it was made, and that's how it was presented. This, after all, was the star of Danger Man in his new full-colour series. This is not being squirreled away on some minor interest channel, because there were no minor interest channels. This debuted in 1967. There were 2.5 TV channels in the country. So it was presented as a mainstream primetime adventure series, which then just turned out to be extremely weird and elliptical. And while maybe it took a while for its influence to really kick in, you can definitely sense its very direct influence in a lot of self-consciously weird and trippy TV shows. I would suggest no Prisoner, no Twin Peaks. Absolutely no Prisoner, no Lost. Lost owed an incalculable debt to The Prisoner. Right up to relatively recent stuff like Life on Mars. Life on Mars to me was a direct hybrid between The Prisoner and The Sweeney. Even into the movies, stuff like The Truman Show. Number 2, it pretty much invented the mini-series. The Prisoner ran for a very odd length of episodes. There are 17 episodes, just one season, 17 episodes. Back then, as now, TV seasons were generally commissioned in multiples of 13, because that's how the year works, 13, 26, 52. Now, apparently when Patrick McGoohan first pitched the idea, he just wanted to do 7 episodes. Just 7 one-hour shows in and out. But that kind of limited series, mini-series format just did not exist in 1966. So initially, I think the idea was to do 2 runs of 13 and have that first series end on a cliffhanger in which the prisoner, number 6, has... Oh, that's the other thing. Nobody has any names in the village. They all just have numbers, and our hero is designated number 6. That is, on the one hand, a nice evocation of the sort of the depersonalization of the village, which is one of the themes of the show. But it's possibly also an expedient to get around to the fact that they don't want to admit that this is still the same guy as in Danger Man. Anyway, in what was going to be the last episode of season 1, number 6 has beaten literally everything the village can throw at him. They admit this and grant him his freedom, and it ends on that cliffhanger. Now, I seem to recall reading somewhere, this may be apocryphal, that the idea for season 2 was it begins with him being released. Season 2 is set back out in the outside world. But over the course of season 2 of The Prisoner Back in the Outside World, he realizes he is still being watched, he is still being followed, he is no more free in the outside world than he was in the village, and hey, maybe he never really was free. In the event, when they finished those first 13 episodes, the decision was made just to make another 4 and then wrap it up. Why they thought they needed another 4, I don't know. But they went ahead and made like this sort of season 1A of 4 episodes, including the finale. Rather awkwardly, of course, Patrick McGoohan, the star, thinking he was going to get some time off between seasons, had signed on to star in the movie Ice Station Zebra. So he wasn't around for the beginning of this filming block. So inevitably, this being a 60s sci-fi show, they do the Mind Swap episode. And for one episode, number 6 is played by Nigel Stock. What this means is the prisoner kind of accidentally ends up inventing the limited series format. 17 episodes in and out, and that's it. And there was never any plans to make any more. Number 3, it proves that sometimes the best ideas happen by accident. Now, certainly one of the most memorable images from the prisoner is the thing called Rover. Although he's only ever called that once in the whole series. The rest of the time he's unnamed. And I say he, it's really an it. It's this sort of sentient weather balloon, which is the village's last line of defense. If you get past all the security cameras and manage to beat up all the t-shirted goons, then this weather balloon pops up out the sea and flattens you, suffocates you, and drags you back to the village. It's probably the most out there fantasy element in the show, certainly until you get to the last couple of episodes. And it was an accident, because in the script, Rover is not a sentient weather balloon. Rover is a kind of weird trundling robot thing. He's described in the script as being this sort of mechanical dome with a flashing light on the top that trundles around the village. What exactly this thing looked like was the source of much speculation in Prisoner fandom back when I was immersed in Prisoner fandom in the 80s. But I think in the 90s, some footage of it actually turned up. I think it's home movie footage that was being shot on a Super 8 camera by somebody who just happened to be in Portmeirion at the time, because certainly no officially filmed footage of Rover Mark 1 exists. But we've all now seen what Rover Mark 1 looked like, and it's shit. It looks like a sort of angry cupcake. And by all accounts, it was just a mechanical nightmare because there was a guy on a go-kart inside it who couldn't see out. So it just sort of bumped into things. And also, thinking about it, wouldn't he slowly die of carbon monoxide poisoning if he's driving a small engine go-kart with this dome completely covering him? Anyway, after about a day of this thing on set, it became apparent that it was bloody useless. Now, at what point they decided to go with weather balloons, or how they were inspired to use weather balloons instead, there are many different accounts. But go with weather balloons they did, and it's a fantastic image. And now it's sort of the central part of the iconography of The Prisoner, is this guy being pursued by this vast white sphere. And like I say, it was a last-minute kick-bollock scramble on set because their stupid bloody angry cupcake prop didn't work. Number 4, it is both ahead of its time and a perfect snapshot of its time. Now, like I say, while The Prisoner is kind of innovative in terms of subject matter and inadvertently innovative in terms of format, on the other hand, it couldn't be more 1967 if it tried. It's so Summer of Love. It's so Sergeant Pepper's. The last episode even begins with All You Need Is Love. So while The Prisoner maybe goes further into the sort of the metaphysical, allegorical end of things than many of its contemporaries, of which more in a minute, it wasn't the only trippy spy show on British TV. The Avengers really hit its stride. That's the Steve and Mrs. Peel Avengers, not the Captain America Avengers. The Avengers really hit its stride when it embraced that kind of weird cartoony Englishness going into the colour episodes. And the idea of blending sort of traditional spy series tropes with fantasy elements was being explored in rather more prosaic fashion in another series called The Champions, which is about a bunch of secret agents who get magical powers. So while The Prisoner was forging ahead in many respects, if you wanted people to get an idea of what popular culture was like in 1967, you could clue them up completely in 2 hours, sit them down, make them listen to the whole of Sergeant Pepper, and then show them the first episode of The Prisoner. Number 5, there is no boring explanation at the end. Of all the TV shows which owe an obvious debt to The Prisoner, the one which I saw recently, which reminded me the most of The Prisoner, was a thing which came out about 5 or 6 years ago called Wayward Pines. Starred Matt Dillon. It was about a cop investigating the disappearance of another cop in this little mountain town. He goes to investigate, his car crashes, he wakes up in the hospital in the mountain town, and now they won't let him leave. And when he tries to leave, he finds himself hemmed in by these really advanced security measures, and also something weird appears to be going on with time, because his partner came looking for him and has been in this town for about 20 years, and as such is now older than him. So something weird is going on with it, and it was a pretty good mystery. And then at the end of season 1, you get to find out what's going on, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's quite a neat idea, I guess. But then they try and do a season 2, and it's a complete bloody waste of time, because the whole point of the show was what's going on. And now you've explained what's going on, it makes the whole thing a bit prosaic and just not very interesting anymore. And that is a mistake that a lot of the things that rip off The Prisoner try to do, including, incidentally, the remake of The Prisoner. There was a belated reboot of The Prisoner, actually a reboot, not using the word incorrectly this time. Reboot of The Prisoner came out in 2009, starring Jim Caviezel and Ian McKellen. It was hyped up a bit before it came out. It was much hyped up like the Comic-Cons of the world. And then it came out and pretty much vanished without trace, and has almost never been mentioned again since. It stuck quite close to the original in some ways. A few scenes were almost exactly remade. There's a scene in the first episode of both where number 6 goes to the village shop and tries to buy a map of the village, and that scene is repeated almost word for word in the new version. But again, the new version, like the original version, kind of coasts along on the enigma of what's going on here, who's in charge here, why is he here, why won't they let him leave. And then in the last episode, they tell you, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess that kind of makes sense. Whereas, rather wonderfully, the original Prisoner absolutely stuck to its guns and never explained anything. The final episode is the one where it finally tips over into metaphysical allegory. There have been kind of metaphysical elements running all the way through the show, and very much the feeling that what we're watching here is some kind of, it's all subtext. There's some kind of an analogy going on here, and maybe none of this is actually meant to be happening. And then you get to the last episode, and you're like, yeah, this is now definitely a metaphor for something, but we don't know what. So the last episode, Fallout, wraps up the show, in my mind, kind of perfectly, but doesn't explain anything. And apparently at the time, people were kind of angry about it. I mean, on the one hand, maybe I'm being a bit of a hypocrite here, because one of the things which annoyed everybody about Lost was the fact that it kind of ambled along to the end and then just stopped without really explaining anything. But the thing about Lost is, you got the impression that they were always going to explain it at the end, and then when they came to try and explain it at the end, they realized that they couldn't, because they hadn't ever really known what it was about in the first place. When you get to the end of The Prisoner, you are very much under the impression that this show was never going to tell you what was going on. that was never on the agenda. Number 6, often imitated, never beaten. There have been many attempts to kind of recapture the magic of The Prisoner. There have been references to it all the way through pop culture ever since it was on. There was a Simpsons episode that was a direct Prisoner parody, and Patrick McGoohan actually turns up in it and does his own voice. Many, many rock videos have referenced The Prisoner. Many other TV shows have alluded to The Prisoner or done the Prisoner-esque episode. And there have been various attempts to revive it over the years, including, like I mentioned, an actual reboot in 2009, which kind of didn't really work. And I think The Prisoner really is one of those lightning in a bottle instances. It's one of those shows where sometimes you'll find that even people who've never seen it seem to know a great deal about it because it's had such a big impact on the collective pop culture. It is, of course, all up on BritBox right now. And if you haven't got BritBox, I'm fairly sure you can download the whole thing on Amazon. One thing I will be interested to see is how people interpret it politically these days, because there's never really a clear consensus on what it meant politically to begin with. McGoohan seemed to think it was some kind of countercultural statement about the importance of being allowed to not fit in, of being allowed to express one's individuality. George Markstein was coming from an altogether more conservative angle, seemed to think that the whole thing was a kind of a libertarian protest against the suffocating overreach of the state. And one can imagine a scenario in which the red pill crowd sees upon The Prisoner as a classic illustration of their own point of view and what they're talking about, much as they did with The Matrix. And, you know, they were completely wrong about The Matrix as well. But that's one of the things that makes The Prisoner so timeless. It's definitely about something, but what it's about is kind of up to you. So anyway, if you haven't seen The Prisoner yet and you have BritBox or Amazon, then do check it out. It is definitely worth your time. If you have seen The Prisoner and you have some thoughts on anything I just came out with, then please share them in the comments. Okay, you know I'm going to say it. I can't not say it. Here it comes. Be seeing you.